Broadcasting from Detroit's Cass Corridor, it's the Metro on WDET. I'm Tia Graham. This hour, Michigan is no stranger to immigrant stories. But did you know the state holds the largest population of Maltese Americans in the country? We'll find out more. Then, we remind you about the dangers of Lyme disease and what to be on the lookout for. But first, somewhere between Sicily and Tunisia, in the Mediterranean Ocean, is a country about the same size as Detroit. It's top 10 in the world for population density and has played host to conquering navies and empires for thousands of years. Though it's halfway across the world, the stories, culture, and people of this island nation are part of Michigan's culture and history. I'm talking about Malta. In fact, Metro Detroit has the largest concentration of Maltese Americans in the United States, around 13,000 out of the 40,000 nationally. The story of Maltese immigrants in Michigan mirrors other immigrant communities that call Detroit home: hard work and the pursuit of economic opportunity. So, how did so many Maltese immigrants find a home in Detroit? What parts of Malta came with them, and what traditions remain generations later? We'll try to answer some of those questions today. I'm joined by Joseph Lubig, author of the book Maltese in Michigan. He's also a professor at Northern Michigan University. Joseph, welcome to the Metro.
Bonjour. Thank you. Nice to see you, hear you.
Nice to hear you as well. So, why did so many Maltese people end up in Detroit in the first place?
Yeah, Tia, I think it was opportunity, right? So I know my grandfather, Grandpa Mike, he came over prior to World War II, and but then after World War II, I think they started immigrating for opportunities in factories and other positions where they could put the skills they had working in the port cities, to good use. And I think, as they started migrating and they were able to take root, more family members and neighbors started to follow. And as part of the, British Empire at the time, they were a lot of them able to migrate as citizens of Britain.
Mm. So where did Maltese originally live in Detroit, Windsor area? And when did they start moving out to the suburbs?
Yeah, so a lot of this is based on my family history,
Yeah.
right? And what I know from aunts and uncles and neighbors. I'd say the 20s through post-World War II, living in the Detroit area and Windsor, but then migrating as the auto factories started moving out to the suburbs. My family immigrated and they lived around Old Tiger Stadium,
Yeah.
Corktown. And then as the factories developed, Ford and GM mostly is where they worked. They started moving with those factories out into the suburbs. And we all ended up in Livonia. And, up until about 20, 30 years ago, where they all started emigrating towards Ann Arbor and Brighton as they started to retire.
Now, let's talk a little bit more about the moment in Detroit, that particular moment. Henry Ford's assembly line was very suddenly changing the world in profound ways. Detroit was a truly modern city at that moment. The Maltese workers that came with shipbuilding, boatyard experience were coming from a very old and storied place. The work that they brought with them, but of course it was important about the work that they kept here with them as well. What do you think made Detroit a destination for generations of Maltese immigrants?
Yeah, I think it's work ethic, right? I mean, along with the skills and then the capacity to apply those skills into other areas was the work ethic that they had and that sense of community that they still have. And I think bringing that level of tenacity, stick to it, witness, I think that's what kept them rooted and connected. And then they found these great moments through church and religious celebrations, feast days, gatherings around food or soccer, football, right? They found these moments to kind of hang everything on those traditions and to keep them all connected so they had that strong sense of community.
Now, have you heard stories from your family about their work in Detroit?
Not a lot about the work,
Yeah.
it's you get moments of things. I think my cousins and I, we talk about how we fall right into that pattern of
Mm.
we're the generation that was, first gen US citizen, and so, English was spoken, and it was just kind of the things that they did, and it didn't seem important to talk about. And now we're really trying to tease out and record those stories, but it's it was something we had to work at getting. Now we get them. Now we get, the stories about Uncle Hank working, as an engineer at Ford Motor, and, Uncle George, working in the factory at Ford, and
Yeah.
Uncle Vic as an architect, and, completing his program. Got to work on the St. Louis Arch, was his only non-hospital gig that he had. And so we get those stories, I think, decades later, because I think we want our kids to know where they came from.
And how easy or how difficult has it been to get those stories out of the older generation?
So I know, right? So food is always central. So
Yeah.
if there's food involved and there's two or more of them in the room, we can get them going and get the stories, because it's this friendly competition on detail and who remembers what, and how it's remembered. And it's really becomes a nice conversational moment for across generations, right? People are asking clarifying questions. Who's that person again? A good example, my Uncle Hank flew in from California, and my Aunt Yvonne, they came over to my dad's house, and they were giving us more stories about World War II, and just the stress they were under from all the bombings,
Mm.
right? From the Axis powers, and uh, and then the humor that was in that, as the war wound down, and it was neat to see them kind of fight over
Yeah.
who had the better story or the more accurate version of what was happening.
Wow. And it's so interesting too, because when we're talking about, of course, the migration here to Detroit, and this is post World War II. Of course, there were folks here before World War II, like your family, but a lot of that population we saw coming in was post World War II. And those stories helped shape so many families. And now that you're recording these family stories, have you been surprised at all about what people remember?
Yeah, and how they remember it.
Hmm.
It's really neat to see a picture, or I know I focus on food a lot, but somebody, can we make pastizzis? Well, that's a lot of work. Well, let's call Aunt Rose. Let's call cousin Steve. Let's get stories around how pastizzis are made. When we go to Malta, we've got to eat at the pastizzi stand, or in at least the area where they grew up. So we're getting an authentic, Zampa family pastizzi, right?
Yes.
Um, but it's really neat to have that come out in those moments. And then this book was a gift to be able to write the Maltese and Michigan book. But just as powerful is the collection that my Aunt Marian uh, put together with Nana and Nanu, and all the brothers and sisters, and they each have their own story, or a nice big three-ring binder of their narratives, and how they saw and remembered and viewed moments in history and in family life. It is a real gift to have that, and
Yes.
I wasn't smart enough growing up to realize how important that was.
Mm,
It took me 20 years post high school to understand that
mm,
that really mattered, and we needed to keep that.
mm. It's the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. My guest is Joseph Lubig, author of the book Maltese in Michigan. We're talking about the unique history of Maltese Americans in Metro Detroit. Now, when you saw that binder and you're seeing some of this information that your family did actually get to keep a hold of, what was going through your mind and how grateful did you feel to have this information?
Just how that it took a focused effort to get it done and put together, the humility that families carry with them. You don't brag about yourself. What we did was nothing special, right? Like, I think a lot of families have that feeling
Yes.
or that attitude, but then to see it in one space, it was really neat to be able to talk to my mom about what was there. Is this accurate? When we go to Malta, when we went to Malta, like I wanted to know where specific things were from, Anne Yvonne and Aunt Margaret, and where did Nana and Nanu get married? Where did they meet?
Yeah.
I, I have cousins there right now. Actually, one of my cousins, Michael, just picked up his Maltese passport, but he's texting us this morning and he wants to know what was the name of the church? What street was that on where they all got baptized? What color is the door on the house where they grew up? It like to be able to go find who you were as a family to help you remember who you are, what you could become, I think is a real gift. And there's a real energy around that.
Now, when was the first time that you completed a trip to Malta? Can you describe what Malta was like that first time and times that you've gone afterwards as well?
Yeah, so I got a real gift about 3 years ago, 2023. I was part of my responsibilities at Northern Michigan University was department head for Native American Studies, and my colleague Martin Reinhardt. We did a lot of research together, and he's a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa, and in the Upper Peninsula, we go to all the places where he's from. We get to visit all of the lands and his relations, and it's just a real gift. And he came to me and he said, "We've gone to see my family, the land I grew up on, the land that
Mm.
roots my history. I put in for a conference in Malta, and we got accepted, and we're going to go see where you're from." And man, that choked me right up because I wanted to go, but to get motivated to go and to have a friend and a colleague who just put it together, and then our wives got to go with us, that was a real gift.
Mm.
And so I've only been back once,
Mhm.
and I am itching to go back again and to take my wife, Pam, and our two kids, Olivia and Joey. I want them to see where that started, right? And how they're connected.
And of course, it was a business trip. It was a little bit more formal. You were with university. But what was it like when you stepped foot down? Were you calling family members, asking them questions too?
Absolutely. So we're right. So and that's the chuckle we had. Let's text mom and find out. Okay, Dominic Street. Let's get to Dominic Street in Salima. We're gonna walk to the docks, take the ferry, and then we get there and we're looking and it's Uncle Vic's like, well, the house isn't there because the neighbors bought it. So now it's two houses into one. So you have to look at it differently. And we're looking and we're talking to the neighbors and asking the neighbors, do you remember the Zampa family? Of course they remember the Zampa family,
Wow.
right? Go down the street to the church where the family was baptized. I know for sure where my mom was baptized, and to see Father Bujaya's name on there, which is Nana Stella's maiden name is Bujaya, that really brought a light to us. And so we got to do the things. We got to live a couple days like we think they lived, but then to check in, right? And then the joy was coming home and sharing that and being told, like, well, you did this right, but you really didn't do this right. So I love that there was still that healthy, playful critique of what we did, because that showed me they were accessing their history and their memories and their lives as they remembered them, and they wanted us to experience it the same way as they did as much as we could.
Now, you've mentioned the church, and the Catholic Church is a big part of Maltese life. What role did the Catholic Church play for the Maltese community here in Detroit?
Central,
Mm.
central role. I mean, in Malta, there is a church for every day of the year. It is fascinating, right? Um, the church in Detroit was key. That was a gathering place. That was where customs and language, food could stay alive. That's where the clubs could form out of those churches and stay connected. Specific focus from the diocese to bring Maltese speaking priests to Detroit to keep that sense of community and history and family. That was key. Newsletters, papers printed in Maltese languages. It just, I think it was important. It was a place to be and gather, and not to have to work so hard at remembering those histories and that connectedness.
Yes. Now, Christianity has seen a decline over the decades, and then some rebounding in recent years. However, is the Catholic Church as relevant for Maltese Americans today as it once was?
Yes,
Mm,
in my I can speak specifically
yeah,
to my family, my cousins, their kids, aunts and uncles. It is central.
yeah.
It is, it's where they meet, and so much so that when we were growing up in Livonia, Michigan, we had our home church, St. Michael's in Livonia, but we would go to St. Genevieve's to listen to Grandma Stella sing. She loved to sing in the choir, and especially during special events, right? The holidays is you made the rounds. You did midnight mass at one of the aunts or uncles or grandparents' churches, and even now, most of my family's moved out to the Brighton area. They meet at church. That's their common place, and then they go out to breakfast afterwards and stay connected, catch up on stories, who's doing what, who's where. So it just it has remained a critical, important piece of weekly ritual, weekly life.
And just piggybacking off of that for a moment, listening to you speak now and the conversations we've had in the past on the metro, one thing that I am seeing as a through line is immigrant families and communities using religion as a way to keep them together. Can you talk about that similarity that you've noticed as well with Maltese Americans and other immigrant communities throughout Metro Detroit?
Yeah, isn't it great to have um, your faith, something bigger than you are, uh, to hold you together? And I loved growing up that our faith, Catholic faith, was never, it wasn't used as a threat
Yeah.
or a way to keep people, in line. It was always used as a hug,
Mm.
as a way to gather and then do the next thing. And I see it in myself, because I'm 8 hours away from most of my family now, up in Marquette, Michigan. But I want to go do those community centered, community based actions every week that resemble and bring me the feeling I had when we would go to church together. And first generation, and again, I'm putting this together decades after, right? I
Mm-hmm.
probably should have realized it, is as first generation US citizen and hearing my grandparents and aunts and uncles talk about this, the Catholic faith for them and the church going had that same attitude as being a US citizen. The common good. We are bound together by the acts we do to serve something greater than yourself and to serve each other. And I like that as a social studies teacher, as a college professor. Man, that really resonates with me, and I've carried that through my entire professional career and my family life.
And like you said, decades later, you're putting these pieces together and you're piecing it together as you're going along, growing and passing it down to the next generation. You're 8 hours away now. How do you stay connected when you're so far away?
Oh, it's so great to have technology to be able to use, video gatherings, or the ease with which we can get around the state. Uh, I'll use Uncle Vic again. He came in a few weeks ago from California. He's 95. And we're like, man, Uncle Vic's here. We got to drop everything. And, if the speed limit's a suggestion, you can get down there in 7 hours, right? So, but I think it's really the use of technology and the modernization of everything has really made it easier. Text groups, cousins my age, we have a texting group where every day, we're just sending pictures or resending pictures or checking in with each other. And there's just a lot of joy being created out of what technology and ease of movement through transportation has given us. And it's so easy to do that now. And you get another little piece of the story every time you do that, right? And it's a really good feeling.
Now, you've talked a lot about connection and community, especially what the Catholic Church has meant to Maltese Americans during Detroit's urban renewal process in the 1950s. St. Paul's Maltese Catholic Church, the only Maltese exclusive church in North America at that time, was torn down to make way for the Lodge Freeway. How did this impact the community?
Yeah, that I don't know a lot about that. What I do know is that there was sadness around it. My family
Yeah,
doesn't talk about that a lot, so I
yeah.
don't know how much they were connected to St. Paul's, but I do know that in hindsight, that it's a lot like moving from the city to the suburbs.
Mm.
Is it hurts, it stings when your physical place of worship or gathering is removed or taken away, demolished, but that's not the piece that matters. What matters is the connectivity and the bonds you've created with neighbors and family, and that's what you're going to take with you and repair. So I can only project and imagine that that's probably what it felt like after folks got over that moment of anger and frustration.
We're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll talk about what parts of identity stick and which ones fade away into the past. You all stay right there. This is The Metro. It's The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham. My guest is Joe Lubig, author of the book Maltese in Michigan. Now, Joe, before the break, we spoke about how Maltese Americans worked in the auto factories. Like other immigrant communities who came to work on the assembly line, there was a tension between preserving cultural traditions and assimilating. In the book, you wrote about how the Americanization efforts were linked to employment. What time period are we talking about, and what did Americanization look like?
Yeah, Americanization looked like it looked like gatherings in church basements, in people's homes, and it was it was a way to make sure that everybody could work together on what it meant to be an American,
Mm.
right? Customs, actions, language, traditions. And I, my research, a lot from the Bentley Library, I was able to grab images from the 1920s on the Americanization efforts. And reading that, there was a sense of pride about what we're going to, but also some defense, right? Like if as new immigration laws come into play and quotas, that we better do all we can to make sure that the Maltese here and other ethnic groups that are here, they understand what it is to be an American, right? So that you're part of that fabric, and really working towards that assimilation process.
Yeah. So it was very much a practical kind of organizing. How much of that meant giving up parts of the Maltese identity?
Yeah, I don't. So it's funny you asked that because I did ask my aunts and uncles about that, and they didn't view it so much from their relatives and what they've been able to glean. Right, is as really giving things up, but
Mhm.
more compromising
Yeah.
and bringing cultures together. Uh, it's the effort that one makes to become part of the country or the community that you are now in to help move it forward, right? At least that's my interpretation of how that was all viewed.
Yeah. So Thinking about, of course, is being in this country, you're seeing the blend of two cultures now. So we have Maltese culture now blending itself with what was at the time the American culture. Could you talk about it for from your family's point of view? What were some of the stories that you were getting from your family about this particular time?
Yeah. So T, are you interested in like when they first emigrated here? Is that what you're asking?
I would love to hear that story.
Yeah, yeah. So it was, coming over in waves and getting themselves rooted with family members that were already here or neighbors, and really it was that slow connection to the Detroit community
Yeah.
and to the city and to those neighborhoods. And as they all got here and they were all a part of, then I what I really heard a lot of were the stories around events, feast days, soccer matches,
Yeah.
again, like I mentioned earlier, events that involve food. It was right, and that those are my richest memories from, I would say, really from second grade on, when I can really have vivid memories of going to Kensington Park or Camp Dearborn or somebody's house in the city or in the suburbs where you are celebrating just being part of your community and your family. I remember soccer matches. Every the ethnic groups, they had their own soccer teams, and those were fierce competitions that always ended in this joyous celebration of food, right, and story, and again, a bunch of kids running around being crazy at the lake or out in the field. We weren't really paying attention to the details on the narrative, but we were certainly paying attention to what it looked like to be part of a tight knit community and part of a family across ethnic groups. Also, it was you kept getting invited in.
It's the Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. My guest is Joseph Lubig, author of the book Maltese in Michigan. Now, the Maltese community is distributed throughout Metro Detroit. Does the spread out nature of Metro Detroit's suburbs change how the Maltese community gets together? Is it affecting how the culture is or isn't being preserved?
Yeah, I think it becomes harder,
Mm,
right? It just the immediate connectivity isn't there. There's more planning involved. I think there's more effort uh, to make sure that people are staying connected. That they that what they do is intentional, and that the time that they're together, whether it's weekly, monthly, or on some kind of annual or reunion kind of basis, I think everybody feels a little bit more pressure. I know I do.
yeah.
You want to get everything in right away, but then that feels it doesn't feel authentic,
Yeah.
right? You're,
That's
you're
right.
pushing too hard, and so, but as especially the moments where the family started moving out to the suburbs, and you've got people on, Uncle Hank and Aunt Carol and Grosse Ile, and people in Livonia, and then people out in Canton, and then it just in Uncle Vic and his family, Aunt Sylvia moving out to California, and Aunt
Yeah.
Marion moving to Arizona. It just it became a lot more work
Mm,
uh, to really keep that whole narrative together. But I think the trade-off is you really value the time more, right? It's the
yeah.
intensity of the time is I think you have to appreciate it for what it is, those 2 or 3 days, and just really understand that it's different, and we just have to keep adjusting.
Is there anything in particular that you worry will be lost?
Well, I think the biggest thing is the language,
Hmm.
right? I it was really interesting when we went to Malta that there is a language requirement for Maltese in the schools, and I think that's really important, right? So it's
Yeah.
Maltese and English spoken uh, in the country, and here, like, we want that back. Like my cousins and I, we want that back, and we want it beyond the phrases, right?
Mm.
But to do that takes a lot of effort and a lot of time, and you're isolated. You're not immersed in a community where Maltese is being spoken
Yeah.
every day, and you're forced to learn it, right? So that you can get things done and make connections. But for me, it's the language. The other thing I was worried about in my immediate family with my two kids and my awesome wife, Pam, is the recipes. Like I wanted to know forever what Aunt Rose's pasticci's tasted like. I wanted to know what Grandma Stella's baked macaroni tastes like. I wanted to know those things. And in a household that is primarily vegan, I was worried about that. But my wife and daughter took it upon themselves to rework all the family recipes so that there are vegan versions. And so I feel like we're able to keep that part of our history and tradition alive because they've taken the effort to do that. And what's been really neat for me is as a family, we're all cooking again. We're all in the kitchen together again. And we're telling stories about our families again and around a new version of the food that fits our dietary style. I think that's pretty cool. And what a great example just how traditions can morph and change generation to generation, right? And still
Right.
keep the essence of what was critical, what was most important about it.
Yeah. We can talk all day about just the cuisine, the culture itself, and what you all have been able to continue to preserve and build here in the state of Michigan. Professor Joseph Lubig is the author of the book Maltese in Michigan. Joseph, thank you so much for joining me on the Metro.
What a pleasure. Grazie.
Grazie. Coming up, Lyme disease is surging in Michigan. We'll hear about diagnosis, treatment, and a possible vaccine for Lyme disease. That's next on the Metro.